Jaylen had long since learned that in the world of high-rise buildings and boardrooms, success wasn't simply about talent. It was about making others believe you belong there. And Jaylen Harper, a self-made architect and founder of Whitfield Dynamics, had built a reputation that demanded respect. As one of the key contributors to the prestigious Global Design Summit, an event that was set to bring together the biggest names in the industry, Jaylen had already put millions into making this conference a success. Yet, the moment he walked into the Lexington Grand Hotel, there was an undercurrent in the air, a subtle, unspoken expectation that he too would be treated as invisible, just another black man waiting for his turn. The conference he had helped plan, where he was not just a participant but a driving force, was set to unfold here. But what he wasn't prepared for was the moment when the weight of his skin would become a barrier to his own hard-earned space. His story was far from being a tale of success born from privilege. It was one of grit, resilience, and rising above those who tried to keep him down, and he wasn't going to let this moment pass unnoticed. Jaylen arrived at the Lexington Grand Hotel early in the morning, just as the city was beginning to stir. The gleaming skyscrapers and polished marble facades of the hotel mirrored the opulence of the establishment, and as he stepped out of the black Lincoln Continental, he couldn't help but notice the difference between the way he was greeted and the way others were treated. His crisp navy blue suit, expertly tailored, and the quiet confidence in his stride should have set him apart in a way that earned respect. But as he approached the entrance, he felt the all-too-familiar weight of being an outsider. The hotel doors slid open, and he entered the cool, sterile lobby, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The lobby was filled with bustling guests, some sitting by the plush lounge chairs, others checking in or out. But as Jaylen moved through the space, the glances he received weren't the ones of recognition he expected. They were looks that passed over him, not quite dismissive but definitely not welcoming either. The air felt heavier, and Jaylen's senses sharpened. He knew this feeling, this quiet but undeniable bias, too well. As Jaylen approached the front desk, the young receptionist glanced up at him briefly, her eyes flicking away almost immediately, as if she had already decided that he didn't belong here. She didn't give him a warm smile or acknowledge him as one would expect when entering a high-end hotel. Instead, her expression was neutral, her gaze colder than the marble countertops in front of her. She continued to tap at her keyboard, barely sparing a moment to look up again, offering only a cursory greeting. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice almost too practiced, as though this was a script she recited over and over without thought. Jaylen felt his pulse quicken for just a second, but his composure remained firm. He placed his reservation confirmation on the counter with steady hands, looking her directly in the eyes. "I'm here for the Global Design Summit. I have a reservation under Jaylen Harper." Without lifting her eyes from the screen, the receptionist's fingers hesitated over the keys for just a moment, scanning his name as though searching for some sign of legitimacy. Finally, she looked at the screen and then back at Jaylen, her gaze flicking briefly over him, a quick, judgmental sweep of his appearance. There was no mistake. Jaylen could feel the weight of the moment pressing in around him, heavier than any of the briefcases or design blueprints he had carried into boardrooms before. The receptionist's eyes lingered just long enough to let Jaylen know that something was off, but not long enough for anyone else to notice. She didn't offer a greeting, nor did she acknowledge the importance of the conference or his role in it. Instead, she simply gave him a polite but dismissive smile and told him to wait outside. Jaylen remained still, his expression unreadable, but the frustration simmered beneath the calm exterior. He wasn't angry, at least not yet, but he could feel the sting of being underestimated, of being treated as if he wasn't the one who made this event possible. The other guests, many of them white, moved through the lobby without a second glance. They were welcomed with handshakes and greetings, ushered into waiting taxis and conference rooms. But Jaylen, who had invested millions of his own money into the summit, was being asked to stand aside. As Jaylen stepped back into the open space near the door, the unspoken weight of racial bias settled around him. He had been here before, ignored, dismissed, pushed to the margins. But not today. Today, his response wouldn't be one of anger or retaliation. It would be a quiet assertion of his place in the world. The hotel might have asked him to wait outside, but he wasn't going to wait quietly for their acceptance. Not today. Not ever again. Despite the mistreatment, Jaylen did not allow his frustration to rise. His reaction was measured, controlled, exactly how he had learned to be in countless other situations like this. His posture remained upright, his gaze unwavering, but his expression remained calm. There was no dramatic outburst, no loud confrontation. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He knew that reactions like that would only give them what they wanted, an excuse to dismiss him further, to write him off as another angry black man. Instead, Jaylen took a deep breath and simply turned toward the door, as if to leave. He wasn't going to argue with them, at least not yet. He was above that. He walked outside with purpose, but there was no visible sign of defeat in his steps. His pace was steady, and his mind was already moving past this moment, to the next, to a decision that would flip the entire narrative. Tasha, Jaylen's assistant, arrived at the hotel just moments after he stepped outside. She had been with him through countless battles in the business world, always ready to step in when things got complicated, always ready to handle the details that Jaylen didn't have time to manage. Her eyes scanned the lobby, her sharp instinct immediately picking up on the tension in the air. It didn't take much to understand that Jaylen had been wronged, but she wasn't about to jump to conclusions. As she approached Jaylen, who was standing at the curb, her voice lowered slightly, filled with concern but still sharp with professionalism. "Do you want me to handle this? I can escalate it. Get their corporate office involved." Jaylen shook his head, his jaw set. "No, not yet. Let's just let them think they're in control for now. We don't need to escalate yet." His voice was steady, firm, and calm, betraying nothing of the quiet storm that had been brewing inside him since he first walked into the hotel. Jaylen could feel the urge to act. There was a fire in him that wanted to lash out at the blatant disrespect. He could see the look on the receptionist's face, the way she had barely acknowledged him, treating him like just another black man walking into a place he didn't belong. But Jaylen had spent too many years training himself to restrain that anger. The lessons had been clear. The world expected a certain kind of reaction from him, and it wasn't one that would serve his purpose. The anger that burned inside him was not a tool for the battle he was about to face. He had learned to channel his energy differently, to turn frustration into a calculated response, to be the calm in the storm. So he kept his cool, refused to let his voice shake, and refused to let them see that they had won anything. He knew that sometimes, the greatest victory came not from lashing out, but from keeping one's composure in the face of a challenge. As he walked back to the front doors, his thoughts shifted. This wasn't just a moment of personal affront. It was a lesson for the hotel, a chance to force them to acknowledge the consequences of their ignorance. But he would do it his way. No confrontation, no tantrum, just a quiet, calculated shift that would change everything. Jaylen had learned to fight battles without ever raising his fists. Jaylen knew he had to escalate the situation, but he wasn't going to do it recklessly. As he stood in the lobby, calmly assessing the situation, he made a calculated decision. He would not let this moment slide. Not because of the offense to his dignity, but because of the principle behind it. He had a right to be here. This wasn't a random incident. This was a statement about the hotel's assumptions. He had earned this space, and he was going to make sure they understood that. Without raising his voice, without showing even a hint of frustration, Jaylen walked back toward the front desk. He looked at the receptionist and asked, his tone level, "I'd like to speak to the manager." His words were clear, his presence steady, and there was no room for further dismissal. The receptionist, already wary of his calm confidence, hesitated, glancing nervously toward her supervisor. She turned her head and muttered something to the back office before returning her attention to Jaylen, her eyes no longer avoiding his. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show that she understood the weight of his request. The hotel staff, unaware of the storm that Jaylen was quietly gathering, didn't quite grasp the magnitude of their actions. They had underestimated him, assumed he was just another man of color passing through, too insignificant to matter in their world of polished lobbies and expensive clientele. But as they led him to the side, Still asking him to wait, Jaylen didn't waver. The manager, Deborah Lancaster, arrived after a few moments, her face already set in an expression of practiced indifference. She looked over Jaylen like she had been expecting to deal with a complaint, not an intelligent, self-assured man who had helped build the event they were hosting. Deborah dismissed Jaylen immediately, her voice cold and clipped. "I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding. You're not on our list. I think you'll need to wait outside." Jaylen didn't flinch. There was no panic, no frustration, just a quiet resolve. He glanced at Deborah, met her eyes, and remained calm. The hotel manager's cold response might have been enough for some to back down. But Jaylen was far from some ordinary guest. He wasn't here by chance. His name wasn't just another on a list. His company had brought this conference to this hotel. The success of the event had, in part, been made possible by his work and investment. This wasn't a battle for his self-worth, it was a matter of principle. "I'm not leaving," Jaylen said, his voice calm but firm, an unmistakable authority behind his words. "You will check again and you will take me seriously. I am the keynote speaker and I run this event. My name is on this contract, and my company is responsible for bringing this summit here. I've paid in full for my stay, and I expect to be treated accordingly." Jaylen's words landed in the air with precision. There was no emotion in his tone, just facts. The manager's posture shifted slightly, uneasy, unsure of how to proceed. The receptionist, who had previously refused to look him in the eye, now seemed to understand that Jaylen wasn't the person they could dismiss so easily. Jaylen's presence had already begun to take hold. He wasn't just another guest at the mercy of their rules. He was a force, and they had just underestimated it. Jaylen stood motionless, absorbing the weight of the situation. The tension in the air was palpable, and the dismissive attitude from the hotel staff only fueled his determination. He could feel the subtle, unconscious bias that had settled around him, but instead of lashing out, he chose a different path. He knew that the hotel's actions were not just a minor inconvenience. They were an affront to the very principles of respect and professionalism that he had spent his entire career building. With a quiet but steady resolve, Jaylen turned away from the desk. He didn't need to make a scene or shout. His decision was already made. This hotel would not be the place for his conference, not under these conditions. He would relocate the entire event, and he would do it quickly. He wasn't going to stand by and let his work be tainted by the racial biases of those who refused to see him for who he truly was. He took out his phone, dialed his assistant Tasha, and calmly explained the situation. "We're moving the conference," he said, his voice steady. "I'll need you to start arranging the relocation. Let the attendees and sponsors know we're changing venues. I'm not doing business with people who can't treat me with the respect I've earned." The hotel staff, completely unaware of the larger repercussions their actions would have, continued on with their usual routine, blissfully ignorant of the storm brewing just outside their doors. Deborah Lancaster, the manager, had already dismissed Jaylen once, and in her mind, the situation was resolved. She had no idea that Jaylen's decision to leave wasn't just about a single room. She had no idea that her dismissive treatment of him was about to affect the entire event she had been hosting. As Jaylen walked out of the hotel and into the parking lot, the staff carried on as if nothing had changed. They were still setting up, still preparing for the conference, assuming that Jaylen would simply let the matter slide and show up like any other guest. They didn't know yet that they had just crossed a line they wouldn't be able to uncross. What they didn't realize was that they weren't just losing Jaylen Harper. They were losing an entire conference, a multi-million-dollar event that was now in the process of being rerouted to another venue. And it wouldn't be long before the consequences of their ignorance began to ripple through their pristine lobby, through their professional networks, and into the eyes of the industry. Jaylen's company, Whitfield Dynamics, immediately went into action, notifying all conference attendees, sponsors, and partners about the sudden venue change. The message was clear. The event would no longer be held at the Lexington Grand Hotel. Within an hour, the entire conference was being redirected to a rival luxury hotel just a few blocks away. Jaylen's calm and calculated decision to relocate had already sent shockwaves through the industry. even before the first sponsor had received the news. At first, the hotel staff didn't realize the magnitude of what was happening. They went on with their preparations for the summit, still unaware of the larger problem unfolding behind the scenes. It wasn't until Tasha made the official call to the event vendors and sponsors that the true scale of the impact began to take shape. Sponsors started pulling out, influencers began backing away, and within hours, the hotel realized that its failure to properly treat one of the conference's most important contributors had just cost them everything. Jaylen's decision to relocate wasn't just a strategic move. It was a masterstroke of leadership, proving that when you refuse to be dismissed or disrespected, you take back control. And the moment the hotel staff began to understand that they had lost the summit, the shift in their demeanor became evident. They scrambled, their once polished confidence faltering as the weight of their actions settled in. As Jaylen's team scrambled to organize the relocation, he wasted no time. He already had a backup plan in place. His network of contacts was vast, and his reputation was one that spoke for itself. He reached out to a rival luxury hotel, the Hayward, just a few blocks from the Lexington Grand. Within minutes, he had secured a new venue for the conference. The decision was final, and the wheels of change were already in motion. Jaylen wasn't going to let this inconvenience drag on. With the venue locked down, he instructed his team to start redirecting the conference attendees and sponsors. The details were carefully orchestrated. Jaylen wasn't just moving a venue. He was making a statement. Every email, every phone call was designed to ensure that not a single attendee would miss the shift. It wasn't about the inconvenience. It was about showing the industry that the standards of respect and professionalism had a limit, and Jaylen had just set it. Within hours, the entire conference had been rerouted. Jaylen personally oversaw the logistics, ensuring that the shift to the new location was seamless. His calm but commanding presence made it clear to everyone involved that he wasn't just managing an event. He was leading a movement. Attendees received notifications on their phones, sponsors were contacted directly, and the event's vendors were rebooked at the new hotel. Jaylen wasn't concerned about the small details. He had already handled those. What mattered now was making sure the event would still run smoothly despite the drastic change. He knew that if the summit went off without a hitch at the new venue, it would send a powerful message about leadership, respect, and resilience. The Hayward staff, already briefed by Jaylen's team, welcomed the conference attendees with open arms, ready to accommodate every need and expectation with the professionalism the Lexington Grand had failed to show. The news about the venue change began to spread quickly, first through the grapevine, then via social media, and soon, it was a full-blown story. The initial reports were vague, but the message was clear. Jaylen Harper, a leading figure in the architectural world, had pulled his conference from the Lexington Grand Hotel after being treated disrespectfully by the staff. As more details emerged, the backlash grew. Industry insiders began to talk, pointing out how a man of Jaylen's stature had been dismissed with such blatant disregard, while others quietly questioned the hotel's treatment of black professionals in general. The impact rippled through the luxury hospitality industry. The Lexington Grand Hotel, once regarded as one of the top venues for high-profile events, suddenly found itself at the center of a public relations nightmare. Guests who had been scheduled for the conference began to post their own messages on social media, expressing their dismay at the hotel's treatment of Jaylen. Influencers who had been scheduled to attend the event pulled out, using their platforms to amplify the growing criticism. By the time the evening arrived, the hotel's reputation had taken a hit. The industry, once so willing to overlook its own biases, was now forced to confront them. The hotel's name became synonymous with ignorance, and Jaylen had made sure they would never forget it. As the story about Jaylen's decision to relocate the conference spread, more and more sponsors began to distance themselves from the Lexington Grand Hotel. Major industry leaders and influential figures who had initially been excited to be part of the summit began withdrawing their support. The sponsors, many of whom were also well-respected professionals in the design and tech sectors, made it clear they could not align themselves with a venue that treated a black entrepreneur with such blatant disrespect. The influencers who had been scheduled to attend the event, many of whom were popular figures in the tech and architectural spaces, also began pulling out. Their decisions weren't just about boycotting the hotel. They were making a statement about the larger issue at play: systemic bias and the mistreatment of black professionals. The flood of pullouts was swift and unrelenting. Within a matter of hours, the Lexington Grand's event calendar had emptied. Their social media pages, once filled with optimistic updates, became the target of online criticism, with dozens of posts calling out the hotel for its mishandling of the situation. The sponsorships, the influencers, and the attendees, each withdrawal hit the hotel's reputation like a wave crashing on a once sturdy shore. As the day wore on, the Lexington Grand Hotel found itself in a full-blown crisis. The immediate fallout was obvious. The conference had been abruptly relocated, and no one seemed to be asking for any apologies. Guests who had come to the hotel for the summit began to check out, some quietly, some with harsh words for the staff. The once glamorous hotel lobby, which had been bustling with excitement earlier that morning, now felt eerily empty. The luxury suites sat abandoned, and the bar was quiet. The event that should have been a grand success for the hotel had slipped away, leaving only the remnants of what could have been. The hotel's management, including Deborah Lancaster, scrambled to make sense of what was happening. They tried to issue damage control statements, but the situation only worsened. The backlash had already gathered momentum on social media, and no press release could fix the deep-seated issues that had led to their public disgrace. Behind the polished veneer of the hotel's pristine lobby, a storm was brewing, one that was far more difficult to navigate than they had ever anticipated. Industry professionals and clients who had once booked the Lexington Grand for future events began to rethink their choices. The hotel's leadership found themselves facing questions they hadn't anticipated, questions about their treatment of black professionals and the systemic racism that had likely fueled the entire debacle. What had begun as a quiet mistreatment of one individual had now become a national conversation. The CEO of the Lexington Grand Hotel, feeling the pressure mounting from all sides, finally made the decision to reach out to Jaylen Harper. The hotel's reputation was in freefall, and a phone call to Jaylen seemed like the last attempt to salvage what little they had left. The call was placed in the early evening, but by the time it reached Jaylen, the damage had already been done. Jaylen answered the phone calmly, his voice betraying none of the turmoil that had taken place earlier in the day. The hotel CEO, trying to salvage some dignity, apologized profusely for the mishandling of the situation, offering vague explanations about miscommunication and errors in judgment. "I'm sorry you were treated this way," the CEO said, his tone soft but insincere. "We've already begun looking into what happened, and we'll be taking disciplinary action." Jaylen listened, his calm demeanor not betraying a hint of surprise. After a long pause, he spoke. "Respect can't be bought," Jaylen said, his voice steady. "It has to be earned, and you didn't earn mine today." The CEO hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Jaylen's blunt response. He offered further apologies, but Jaylen had already made up his mind. The hotel's apology meant little now. It wouldn't change the fact that the Lexington Grand had failed to treat him and his conference with the respect they deserved. Jaylen ended the call without fanfare, leaving the CEO with nothing but a stark reminder of the difference between offering apologies and truly understanding the damage caused. As the fallout from the Lexington Grand's treatment of Jaylen continued to ripple through the industry, the hotel's leadership realized they could not escape the consequences. Deborah Lancaster, the manager who had been the primary point of contact when Jaylen was dismissed, found herself at the center of the controversy. Her refusal to acknowledge Jaylen's importance, along with her condescending attitude, had set off a chain reaction that was beyond her control. Within a week of the incident, the hotel's corporate office had acted. Deborah was quietly removed from her position. The decision was swift and without ceremony. Her handling of the situation had been an embarrassment to the hotel, and now it was clear that her leadership had contributed to a crisis that no amount of PR could mend. The hotel's board of directors issued a formal statement, not about the mistake they had made, but about how they were realigning management to better serve their clients in the future. But the truth was plain to everyone who had been paying attention. Deborah's failure to show respect for Jaylen, simply because of his race, had cost the hotel far more than a managerial position. It had cost them credibility, clients, and any semblance of dignity they had once held. Meanwhile, at the Hayward Hotel, Jaylen's decision to relocate the Global Design Summit was proving to be a triumph. The new venue, though last minute, had been prepped and ready to accommodate the hundreds of attendees, sponsors, and speakers. The atmosphere was one of excitement and professionalism, as if the entire event had been planned here from the start. The new hotel staff treated Jaylen and his team with the utmost respect, immediately earning their trust and admiration. The conference went off without a hitch. Speakers took to the stage, panels began, and the conversations about architecture, design, and innovation flowed seamlessly. Attendees spoke highly of the venue's attention to detail and the overall execution of the summit, praising Jaylen's leadership in organizing such a major event on short notice. The sponsors who had initially pulled out of the Lexington Grand Hotel were now visibly proud to be associated with Jaylen and his conference. The media buzz surrounding the relocation had only added to the event's success, and attendees were more than satisfied with the change in venue. What could have been a disastrous moment had turned into a powerful example of Jaylen's resilience and commitment to excellence. Jaylen's calm strength and decisive leadership didn't go unnoticed. In the days following the summit, he received an outpouring of support from professionals across the industry. Colleagues, competitors, and peers all recognized the gravity of what he had done, not just by relocating the conference, but by standing firm in his beliefs and showing the world that respect is earned, not demanded. Articles began appearing in industry magazines, praising Jaylen not just for his business acumen, but for his quiet courage in the face of adversity. His ability to rise above the racial bias he had faced, while maintaining professionalism and focus on his work, inspired many in the design and tech communities. Jaylen became a symbol of leadership and integrity, someone who had shown how to navigate systemic discrimination without resorting to anger or confrontation. His example sparked a broader conversation about diversity, inclusion, and the importance of standing up for what's right. And for those who had once doubted him, the message was clear. Jaylen Harper was a force to be reckoned with. As Jaylen's conference continued to run smoothly at the new venue, the media began picking up the story. What had started as a viral moment about one man's mistreatment quickly became a national conversation about race, privilege, and the realities faced by Black professionals in spaces of power. News outlets across the country began to report on the incident, offering varying perspectives on the Lexington Grand's treatment of Jaylen and its consequences. Cable news shows, tech blogs, and business magazines all ran stories discussing how Jaylen Harper had been forced to relocate his own event after being treated disrespectfully by the hotel's management. The mainstream media didn't just focus on the conference's success. They used the incident to highlight the systemic racial bias that permeated many industries, including hospitality. In interviews, Jaylen was praised for his composure, with journalists noting that his decision to relocate the event instead of engaging in a public outburst made his point more powerfully than any confrontation ever could. The hotel's reputation was irreparably damaged, but Jaylen's profile had grown exponentially, as he became the face of quiet strength and professional integrity in the face of adversity. Jaylen's actions sparked a broader public discussion about racial bias in business and hospitality. The media coverage of the conference relocation was just the beginning. Social media platforms exploded with people sharing their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment in professional settings. Jaylen's calm, collected response to his mistreatment had given voice to so many others who had faced similar challenges but didn't know how to confront them. Industry leaders, HR departments, and companies began to reevaluate their own practices. Webinars and panel discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion became more frequent, with Jaylen's story being used as a prime example of how leaders should handle discrimination, quietly but decisively. The story wasn't just about Jaylen's success in relocating the conference. It was about what it represented. It was about standing up to the subtle biases that often go unnoticed but are deeply ingrained in our systems. It was a reminder that, as much as progress has been made, there was still work to be done, and that people like Jaylen, who navigated the world with dignity and authority, were showing others the path forward. The story of Jaylen Harper didn't just end with the successful conference. His ability to stay calm and composed, to handle systemic bias with grace and strength, reverberated far beyond the event. The The hotel's fall from grace became a cautionary tale, one that would be discussed for years to come as an example of how unchecked prejudice can destroy a reputation. Meanwhile, Jaylen's actions served as a beacon for other professionals, especially Black professionals, who faced similar challenges in their own industries. Through this experience, Jaylen had shown the world that quiet strength wasn't about being passive or avoiding confrontation. It was about standing firm in your convictions, commanding respect without demanding it, and making sure your voice is heard, whether the world is ready for it or not. By the time the conference concluded, Jaylen wasn't just a successful entrepreneur. He had become a leader, a symbol of how resilience and composure could lead to lasting change. His actions forced the industry to reflect, to question, and to act in ways that would leave a lasting impact on how businesses treated their employees, customers, and clients from every background. Jaylen Harper's story wasn't just about one man. It was about creating a world where respect and fairness were not up for negotiation. And through his actions, he ensured that those who followed in his footsteps would never have to fight the same battles in the same way again. For more chilling true time crime stories, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to like and share.